Hey, what's going on, guys? Realm Gaming here, back in another video. Today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the Restoration Shaman for Season 1 Mythic Plus for 1105. So this guide's specifically going to go over the Totemic tree. We're not going to be looking at the Farseer tree in this video, but we will be doing a Farseer video in the future, so I do apologize if that's something that you had expected, but we are only going to be covering the Totemic tree. Seems like that's what most people are running at the moment on Raider.io, so I want to cover, the best build first. Now, with that being said, you can play whichever tree that you like. From a throughput standpoint, they're both very close. I just think that Totemic is a little bit easier to play, and there's less things that you have to manage as compared to Farseer. Now, on the flip side, Totemic is a little bit more mana hungry, so you do have to be a little bit more careful with it. However, we did get some changes in 1105 that are going to kind of help us with our mana on the Totemic tree, so we'll take a look at that right now. All right, so first major change of Totemic. The Shaman, Resto Shaman, they get a ton of changes. You didn't see as many as things like Holy Paladin, Restoration Druid, Mistweaver Monk, but they did get, a few core changes. So one of the main issues with Totemic has been the high mana cost of playing around Chain Heal. The Totemic tree is a very sort of Chain Heal style sort of gameplay, and if you don't like pressure Chain Heal, then you probably will not like the Totemic tree. But Chain Heal is pretty much a staple of Restoration Shaman, so anybody playing the class probably likes Chain Heal. But thankfully we did get some changes to some of the mana issues, so that's going to be Coalescing Water here, which is a brand new talent. So Chain Heal's mana cost is reduced by 10%, and Chain Heal increases the initial healing of your next Riptide by 75%, stacking up to 2 times. So this is really nice because this frees up some talent points if you do, for example, if you don't want to go into Ancestral Awakening and you want to go into something more like a Primordial Wave focused build, we do have that link now to where we're not having to spend 2 points to get into our high tides. So that has been very nice for us. We did get some changes to reactive warding now. So reactive warding is going to cause Water Shield and Earth Shield to consume their charges 1 second faster. Then one thing that I did forget is on High Tide here. So every 1 million mana you spend brings a High Tide. So we track this a little bit differently now. So we have a tracker up here in the top right called Swelling Tide. And at 100 stacks, that'll be the million mana that you've spent. And we just have an easier way to be able to track that essentially. So just to show you guys here, I'm at 56 stacks. We'll cast a few Healing Surges, we'll build it up. And when that reaches 100 stacks, you can see now our High Tide up here has procced. All right, then in terms of changes, that's pretty much it for Restoration Shaman. There were some visual updates. We had some minor changes like the base cost of Sky Fury. We can now float on water with our Ascendants. But for the most part, that's all the core changes that we're really looking at here. Okay, let's talk about like talent, synergy. I don't want to say the rotation. We'll kind of go over the rotation later in the video, but just how your spells synergize with your talent tree and your hero talent tree. So things that you need to be tracking, things that you need to be worried about in your general rotation. So one thing that I do want to get out of the way is on my Totemic tree right now, I'm taking Pulse Capacitor because I do not have a shield on this character. I only have the 2-hand staff. But in most cases, you do want to be running Tide Colors Guard. I'll try to remember to switch back to it when we do our import, or excuse me, when we share our import string in the description of the video. But that's why I'm running Pulse Capacitor. Everything else here should be up to date. All right, now let's just quickly talk about why Restoration Shaman is so strong right now. And the reason Resto Shaman is so strong is because they can do pretty much everything. We have a Lust, we have a Self-Cleanse, we have a group AoE cleanse through Poison Cleanse Totem. We have Great Burst Emergency Healing. We have totems for fears. If the tank dies, we can drop an Earth Elemental down while we wait on a B-Res. Just any sort of situation that you can throw at the group, typically Restoration Shaman has a way to handle it. We're kind of in a weird sort of meta right now where classes that used to be good at certain things aren't anymore. So for example, like Holy Paladin, they're not the great spot healer. I mean, they're good at spot healing, but they're not what they used to be. And when you have all these different healer specializations that aren't really filling the role that they should be filling, that they have filled historically, that's when you're going to see something like Restoration Shaman become very powerful. So Resto Shaman, the core of Resto Shaman is, I don't want to say the core of this build is behind Riptide. Farseer is much more focused on Riptide than Totemic, but it's still something that you want to keep up because we do have a ton of synergy in our resto tree with Riptide. So let's just go ahead and talk about Riptide first. Why is it so good? So if you're not familiar with what Riptide even is, it's a heal over time effect. You get 2 charges of it through talents, and you can just kind of throw it on somebody and it does some ticking healing. So I will press it. That's the Riptide effect, and you can see my health over here is kind of ticking up. So if we come down here into our search bar and type in the word Riptide, you can see why Riptide is so strong and so core to us. There's so many talents that synergize with this. So don't worry, we're not going to cover all this. We're just going to cover kind of the core things here. So first thing I would talk about is Tidal Waves. So this is very important to understand when playing Restoration Shaman, is that as you cast Riptide, you get these 2 stacks of Tidal Waves, and you could spin those stacks on a couple different spells. So if we just read it out here, Tidal Waves reduces the cast time of your next healing wave or chain heal by 20%, or increases the critical effect chance of your next healing surge by 30%. So you have 3 abilities that you can use this on. And which abilities you decide to use that on is going to be up to you. It's going to depend on the situation. Now, by default, this is really annoying to track because when you cast your Riptide, just for example, you can see up here in the top right, we have 2 stacks of Tidal Waves. Well, when I'm in a Mythic Plus dungeon, I don't want to be worrying about 2 little stacks up here in the top right. I don't want to be taking my eyes off the fight right here in the center. So I went ahead and moved this weak aura over here to the center of the screen so that you guys can see it now. So what we'll do is when we cast our Riptide on ourselves, you can see now here in the center of the screen that we have 2 stacks of this Tidal Waves. So you can track your Tidal Waves however you want. This is just how I do it. And I like to keep things in the center of my screen so that I can, keep my eyes on the fight. So I get to spin this on 3 spells. I can spin it on Healing Surge, Healing Wave, or my Chain Heal. So to show you guys what that looks like, as I cast a couple Healing Surges here, you can see those stacks start to go away. So the idea of what we're trying to do is we always want to have a couple stacks at our disposal. So this sort of core gameplay loop is going to be cast a Riptide, you get 2 stacks of these Tidal Waves, spend it on a Healing Surge or Chain Heal, or maybe even a Healing Wave if there's not much damage going out, then Riptide again. So the main thing that you just need to know right now is that Riptide applies Tidal Waves at 2 stacks. So let's go ahead and go into some of these other core spells that we just kind of talked about here. So next one is going to be Healing Surge. So Healing Surge is going to be your quick, inefficient heal. It costs a lot of mana, but it does a whole bunch of healing in a very short duration. So there is another little bit of a gameplay loop that happens around Healing Surge, but we'll get to that in just a minute. I want to talk about these 3 or 4 core spells before we move any further. So up next is going to be Healing Wave. This is going to be sort of your slow, mana efficient heal. It doesn't do as much HPS as Healing Surge. However, this is something that you will be casting quite a bit when there's not much damage going out. So if you're trying to conserve your mana, rely on Healing Wave. And then finally, we have Chain Heal, which is going to be the bread and butter of our current build. So what Chain Heal works is you cast it and it shoots out these links of water of healing, and it kind of heals a whole bunch of allies around that initial target. So to show you what that looks like, I can target this dummy here. I can cast Chain Heal, and you can see it links from the dummy to me into another ally over here. So just to kind of go over what we just talked about again, you're casting Riptides, then you're picking one of these 3 spells depending on the current situation that you're in. Now, there's another very core part to this, and that is going to be something we haven't talked about, Undulation. So Undulation is every 3rd Healing Wave or Healing Surge heals for an additional 50%. So whenever Undulation comes up, you're going to make sure that you are targeting the lowest health party member, and you're going to do that because you're going to be getting so much more healing from that Healing Surge. It's going to be buffed by 50%. So you don't want to waste a really strong Healing Surge on a party member that's at 75% health, because you're going to be wasting all that with overhealing. Instead, you probably want to spend that on something like the tank, who's going to be able to take all that extra healing. So that's something else that you'll have to track. So you can kind of see we're starting to get a theme here. Resto Shaman has a lot of things to sort of track. So that's going to be these 3 bars here in the center of the screen. So it automatically starts at 1 bar. I don't know why it does that, because it's every 3. So, but the way it works is you go Healing Surge and it will build another bar, your second Healing Surge, which is this bar, and then your 3rd Healing Surge is, you can see it glows yellow. This means we have Undulation that is procced. It means we're going to get a beefed up Healing Surge or Healing Wave. And then that's when we want to be like targeting the tank or a low health party member and not wasting that extra healing. So this is another weak aura called Undulation here. I will also put this in the description of the video. There's no crazy setup with this or anything. Just like the Tidal Waves weak aura, you just put it in and it works. Okay, so while we're still on the topic of these 3 or 4 spells, I do want to get one more thing in there because it's kind of up there on the priority list of Restoration Shaman, and that's going to be a talent here called Master of the Elements. So, casting Lava Burst increases the healing of your next healing surge by 30%, stacking up to 2 times. Healing Surge also applies Flame Shock to a nearby enemy when you are empowered by Master of the Elements. Okay, so it has a very sort of similar loop, I guess gameplay loop, as playing with Riptide. You want to Riptide, get a few spells in, Riptide again. Now we're adding Lava Burst to the mix. Now, Lava Burst only comes into the mix when there's not a whole bunch of damage to heal. And I don't think that's necessarily correct. It's whenever there's no allies that are in immediate danger. So if you know somebody's not going to die, it's okay to sneak in that Lava Burst to get that additional healing from our Master of the Elements. But we'll get into that a little bit more once we get to the priority and the rotation, all that stuff. But just know this is kind of how Master of the Element works for now. Okay, this takes me into the next step of what I want to talk about here. So you can see my Healing Tide has changed to Lava Burst. So there's a macro, it's a help harm macro. And what this does is it basically turns the icon or the spell to the other depending on what you're hovering over. So we have Riptide and Lava Burst that are in this macro. So when I hover over this dummy, it goes to Riptide because that's an ally. And then when I hover over an enemy, it goes to Lava Burst. And this is very helpful because these are 2 spells that we're going to be casting a whole bunch. And we want to make sure that we are getting as much uptime on Lava Burst and Riptides that we possibly can because of the benefits that they give us. So another thing that this helps with is it takes a lot of the button bloat out of it. All right, we made some additional changes here. The mouse over or the help and harm portion of this wasn't set up correctly. I don't even think I had a harm portion to it. So this is the macro we'll be using. Now you can see as I hover over this dummy, it goes to Riptide. As I go over this dummy, it goes into Lava Burst. Okay, so we talked about the 3 core healing spells, and we talked about Lava Burst and Riptide and how you kind of want to weave those into your normal rotation to get the benefits from those. Let's go ahead and dive a little bit further into more of what Totemic even is. So normally Restoration Shaman has a spell called Healing Rain. However, when you take Surging Totem here, it's on a 24-second cooldown. It will actually replace your Healing Rain spell, and it's just kind of built into the Surging Totem spell. Now you'll notice that the duration of Surging Totem and the cooldown of Surging Totem are both 24 seconds. So this means that we get to have 100% uptime on our Surging Totem. And I say Surging Totem on our Healing Rain effect. So let's understand quickly what Healing Rain is and why you want to keep this down. So Healing Rain's over here in the top right, 10-second cooldown. You place it on the ground. It heals allies that are standing within it. So we drop it, very big circle. All the allies within this are being healed. Now you'll notice that this target dummy is being damaged. So why is it being damaged? So that's going to be due to a talent called Acid Rain here. And this is going to be a very core part of your damage and healing. So you want to make sure that you always have this down because we get a ton of damage from it. And we also get a ton of healing from it. Now we also have one other spell I want to talk about that kind of revolves around Healing Rain. And that's going to be a spell called a Downpour. So casting Surging Totem has a 100% chance to activate Downpour, allowing you to cast Downpour within 12 seconds. So Downpour by itself isn't that crazy of a heal. But the reason you want to be casting Downpour as much as you can is because this is going to increase your allies' health by 10%, their max health by 10%. So not only is that strong, but we have even more synergy. So we get 10% health from Downpour, right? And then we also get health from Ancestral Vigor here. So targets you heal with Healing Wave, Healing Surge, Chain Heal, or Riptide's initial heal. With that, Riptide's initial heal, get 10% increased health for 10 seconds. So we're basically all the allies that we're healing are getting their health buffed up by 20% just for having a Resto Shaman in the group. But that only happens if you are staying on top of pressing Downpour. Ancestral Vigor here is going to proc pretty passively. It's just going to kind of happen in your rotation. Okay, now let's talk about Lively Totems, and this is going to kind of bring me back to Chain Heal. There was a thing or two that I did miss that I want to get back to. So with Lively Totems, when you summon a Healing Tide Totem, Healing Stream Totem, Cloudburst, Mana Tide Totem, or Spirit Link Totem, you cast a free instant Chain Heal at 100% effectiveness. So that's a lot of spells, right? But the main one we want to focus on is going to be Healing Tide Totem. So that's this totem right here. So, Healing Stream Totem. So this on a 24-second recharge, we get 2 charges of it. You can see it's on my 5 key down here. And what this spell does by itself is you just place it down. It does some ticking passive healing. Now, the bonus that we get through Lively Totems is that when we drop this, it's going to be casting a chain heal for us. So to show you guys what that looks like, you can see it's on my 5 key. We're just going to drop it, and then it's going to cast a chain heal for us. Now, this is very strong because this turns our Healing Stream Totem into a very strong button to press. So most of the times, I'm not saying to rely on Healing Stream Totem to cast your chain heals, but if you do have charges of it, go ahead and spend them on Healing Stream Totem rather than chain heal, because Healing Stream Totem doesn't cost near as much mana. Healing Stream Totem costs 45,000 mana versus chain heals 126,000 mana. So if you have the option, press Healing Stream over chain heal in most cases for that chain heal effect. Now, the reason I wanted to get back on the topic of chain heal is because I did forget something. We have a talent down here called High Tide. At least I don't think I talked about this. I think I talked about it in the intro with the changes, but every 1 million mana you spend brings a High Tide, making your next 2 chain heals heal for an additional 10% and not reduce with each jump. So the normal version of chain heal actually reduces with each jump. So the fact that this doesn't reduce with each jump makes chain heal much more powerful during a High Tide. So we actually track this a little bit differently now. So you can see in the top right, I have something called Swelling Tide. So a High Tide will swell at 100 stacks. This is going to be based off mana spent. They just put it into a smaller number so it's easier to track. And when that sucker gets up to 100 stacks, we'll just kind of start spamming some spells here. But basically, when this gets to 100 stacks, you'll see a little icon up here at the top. And here it is. So that means you have a High Tide. It's this other blue icon up here. And you can see we have 2 stacks of High Tide. So our next 2 chain heals, you can see it glowing down here, are going to be beefed up by a ton. And I do believe that those stacks will reset at the start of each encounter, excuse me. I think that's one of the new changes that they came out with. But just know, when a High Tide does come up, you're going to be spending those chain heals. Typically, I like to pair my High Tide with a high damage event, so I don't overheal with the chain heals too much. But you can make that call based on your given situation. And yeah, guys, that's pretty much it in terms of the core sort of gameplay loop of Restoration Shaman. Okay, let's quickly talk about shields now. So we have 2 main shields that we're worried about. We have Earth Shield, and then we have our Water Shield. Okay, so long story short with both of these, Earth Shield is going to restore health. Water Shield is going to restore mana. Now, Water Shield can only be placed on yourself, but with Earth Shield, through some of our talents, we can put a charge on ourselves and a charge on the tank. So you always want to keep this up on the tank as well, because of that 3% damage reduction is going to really add up towards the end of a dungeon. And you really want a good way to be able to track these if they fall off. You want some sort of warning, because if either of these fall off, you're going to notice it pretty quickly, especially in terms of Water Shield and your mana regeneration. So if you look at my character here, I have 2 icons. I have an Earth Shield and a Water Shield icon. And if I was in the party with somebody else, there'd be a 3rd box here saying, hey, you need to be putting your Earth Shield on that other target. So this is a Wikar as well. I believe this is the Shaman Elemental Shields here. So I will post a link to this in the chat. Yes, I know it is because it's glowing down here. Here you can see it, on an ally. It would be glowing like this and saying, hey, your ally doesn't have an Earth Shield on them. But yeah, I'll put a link to this in the description of the video. All right, now let's talk about some of the major cooldowns and major utility, So there's 3 things in major utility that I want to talk about. I guess really 4 if you counter interrupt wind shear, but if you're in a Mythic Plus dungeon, just make sure that you're interrupting as much as you can. That's not really a beginner thing, but as you get more comfortable with your rotation, try to squeeze some interrupts in there. Then we also have Poison Cleansing Totem, we have Bloodlust, and we have our class buff. So we have Sky Fury, and we also have Earth Living Weapon. Man, there's so many things to talk about here. So Earth Living Weapon is going to be a talent. Basically, you just press it. It puts a weapon imbuement on your main hand weapon here, and this is going to make you heal for more, essentially. So we look at Earth Living Weapon here. We get that imbuement. So your Riptide, Healing Wave, Healing Surge, and Chain Heal have a 20% chance to trigger Earth Living on the target, which is just like another heal every time effect. So whenever you go into a dungeon, you're going to make sure that you are putting your Earth Living Weapon on. And then we also have a new buff here, a new party buff called Sky Fury. So whenever you go into a group, make sure you're pressing that as well. So let's quickly look at what Sky Fury is. So reading this out, basically we press it, and this is going to give our entire party 2% mastery, and it's going to empower their auto attacks to have a 20% chance to instantly strike again for 1 hour. So if you're familiar with like Mark of the Wild for Restoration Druid, the stamina buff from Priest Powered Fortitude, it's just one of those, but for Shaman. So at the start of every single dungeon, make sure that you're putting those two on yourself and your party. Up next, let's talk about Bloodlust. So Bloodlust is going to be something that you want to coordinate with your group. Typically, in lower level keys, you're just using it on boss fights. But you can see it has a 5-minute cooldown, but it will put a sated effect on your entire group for 10 minutes. So even though it's a 5-minute cooldown, you can only really use it once every 10 minutes. This is very, very bad if you use this at the wrong time. So make sure for the dungeon starts, if this is something that you're kind of planning around. There's actually a weak hour for this as well. Let me bring it up here. And this is called, I believe it's Lust Reminder. Yeah, here it is in the middle. Lazy Lust Reminder. And what this will do is you can kind of see it pop up here. So anytime you go into a boss, it'll say, do you want to lust, essentially. And this will go away. It'll play a noise, but it will go away after like 5 or 10 seconds into the fight. But it's just kind of a reminder to say, hey, press your Bloodlust button. So we will put this in the description of the video as well. And then the last main utility that I want to talk about is going to be our Poison Cleanse Totems. So this is going to be something that, especially in this season, you probably want to be running it just about every dungeon. I think there's probably a few in there that you don't have to run this. But basically, you drop it on the ground, and it's going to remove poison from the entire party. Now, if you do end up getting into higher keys and you start running into something called the Devour Affix, Mythic Plus has a rotating list of affixes, and when you run into the Devour week, Poison Cleansing Totem will be something that you run in every single dungeon, because you will drop this down and it will completely negate the entire affix. So the affix is normally a healing absorb, but when you drop Poison Cleansing Totem, it will completely remove the entire healing absorb from everybody in the group. So something to keep in mind. Also, just another general tip, I have an add-on here. It's called Opie. I have another video, I think it's Opie. I always pronounce it wrong, but I will leave a link to this in the description of the video. This is where I like to put some of my lesser used like totems. I have a cap totem in here, my water shield, because one of the issues that Restoration Shaman has is button bloat. You can see I've taken 7 spells here off my bars, and you can see, it's still pretty full. So if you guys want to check that out, again, I have a video on my channel. Just type in OPIE when you're searching my channel, and it should come right up. That one does require a little bit of additional setup to use. All right, let's get into some of the core cooldowns, some of our main cooldowns. So I'm only going to talk about 4, I would say. So the first one I want to talk about is Healing Tide Totem. This one's very straightforward. You just simply drop it down on the ground. Now, we will get a chain heal from it through Lively Totems, and what it will do is this will pulse out healing, and it just does passive AoE healing to your group. Very simple, very straightforward. Then up next, we have Ancestral Guidance here. This is going to be on a 2-minute cooldown. Just to read it out, for the next 10 seconds, 10% of your healing done and 25% of your damage done is converted to healing on up to 3 nearby injured party or raid members. So kind of a cool talent here. Basically, it just means you're going to do more healing, but it also means that the damage that you do will be converted into healing as well if you decide to, kind of go that route. This is very, very strong on trash pulls where, the tank is pulling a whole bunch of mobs. You can get your acid rain down. You can get a few chain lightnings in there and do a whole bunch of like burst initial damage that can be converted into healing on your group. Up next, we have probably the strongest cooldown. Maybe it's probably not as strong as Spirit Link, to be honest, but it's extremely strong. Also on a short cooldown, 2 minutes. This is going to turn you into a Water Ascendant, and basically you just do a whole bunch more healing. So the Ascendant is going to copy your healing at 70% effectiveness, and it'll also do some burst healing when you press it. So that's one of the great thing about Restoration Shaman cooldowns is they are so straightforward. I mean, you literally press them and you do more healing. So another very easy one to play around, one that's not so straightforward, but it is very, very powerful. Probably your strongest healing cooldown is going to be our Spirit Link Totem here. So this is on almost a 3-minute cooldown, and the way that this works is basically anybody standing in the link. So we'll drop it here to show you what it looks like. It's going to make this big link on the ground. Anybody who gets into this circle is going to have their health shared. So if you have an ally that's at 20% and an ally at 40%, their health is going to be combined or distributed between each other, and they'll both end up at 40% health. So basically, it'll take some health from the 60% target and give it to the 20% target until their health values match. So a little bit trick with this spell is you can drop a Spirit Link if everybody's in it, and you can just spam heal yourself, and everybody's health will be evenly distributed. So you don't have to like AoE heal or anything. You can just funnel a ton of single target healing into one specific target. So it's a very, very potent heal. If you, just for example, if you were to drop like a Spirit Link and Ascendance both together, that would be a lot of tools to use at once. But I mean, you could take a group up from 20% to 100% in like 2 seconds. It's crazy. And also the fact that those are just on 2-minute cooldowns. I guess Link's on technically a 3-minute cooldown, but Resto Shaman has some of the strongest cooldowns out of all the healers. Okay, let's talk about healing priority now. So your number one priority is going to be High Tide. So depending on, when a High Tide procs, you want to make sure that you are using your High Tide procs when there's emergency healing that needs to be done. So typically, if you have like 3 or 4 targets that are all at 50% health, this is a great time to spend High Tide. Now, one thing to note about High Tide as well is it does have a duration. So you want to make sure that you're using High Tide before it does expire as well. All right, then your next priority is going to be Master of the Elements and playing around that spell. So remember from earlier, Master of the Elements, when we cast those Lava Burst, our next healing surges are going to be buffed by 30%, stacking up to 2 times. So if you can, get a Lava Burst out there, try to proc that Master of the Elements so that your next healing surge can be beefed up. Now from here is where we sort of complete that gameplay loop. So we have the gameplay loop of Master of the Elements, and we have the gameplay loop of Tidal Waves. I had to come in here and change the macro one more time. We had to get an app player. We had to put an app player constraint in there just in case we're not hovering a target, we're hovering an ally. What do we do when we're just hovering over nothing? That's when we can cast basically Riptide on ourselves. But that brings us into our third priority, and that's going to be casting Riptide. And casting Riptide again is going to bring us into that Tidal Waves sort of gameplay loop. All right, then our fourth priority, is going to be Surging Totem. So we're going to make sure we're getting Surging Totem out so that we can get that big AoE heal effect on the ground, and then we can also get a whole bunch of damage from our Acid Rain talent. And then remember, we can also activate Downpour right here. You can see on my Shift Q. And we want to, well, it just expired, but we want to activate Downpour so that we can get that increased health from the Downpour talent. Your next priority is going to be around Healing Stream Totems, so that, when you're in a situation where you need to cast an emergency chain heal, you typically want to rely on Healing Stream Totem over casting a hard chain heal. It's more mana efficient, and it does the same amount of healing. And then your sixth priority is going to be Healing Surge, Healing Wave, or Chain Heal. So we're kind of looping through our Master of the Elements. We're looping through our Tidal Waves, and you're casting one of those 3 spells depending on what type of healing is needed. Emergency Burst Heal, like single target healing, group AoE healing will be Chain Heal. And then if there's not much damage going out, you can Healing Wave. And you want to keep in mind that we do have our Undulation here that we're tracking as well. And we do have this bar here to kind of help us track that. So every 3rd Healing Wave or Healing Surge will heal for 50% more. All right, and then final thing here that we want to be making sure that we're doing is that we are maintaining our shields at all times, your Earth Shield charges and your Water Shield charges. Then outside of that, that's kind of where all this utility stuff kind of comes into play. If there's nothing else to do, you can cast a Stone Bulwark Totem to kind of help absorb some damage on pool. You can drop a Capacitor Totem at the start of a pool if you think that would be useful. But that's sort of the general priority that we're looking at, is those 7 things. So just so you guys can see it here, kind of a quick recap here. High Tide, Master of the Elements, Riptide, Surging Totem, Healing Stream Totem into one of your main 3 healing spells, and then finally maintaining your shields. And of course, we cannot end the video without saying thank you to our patrons. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We'll see you on the next one.